So, Whitney, when I was listening to your story, it's very touching, and I wondered, do you ever sometimes say, like, why me?
Not really. I tried the whole time we were going through it. I think it was about 5 years of a really hard time from start to finish, and we were really just immersed in it. I mean, we had really no time to think. We had, the babies, and my husband had to, he quit his job to take care of me full time. And to be honest, I was really out of it a lot of the time, and trying to focus on being as much of a mother and a wife as I was capable of. And I was trying as hard as I could not to feel sorry for myself. And I think there are a few people here who knew me at the time and saw me going through it. I was constantly trying to focus on the light at the end of the tunnel, no matter what that would be, even if it was just going for a walk with the family. I was really trying to focus on just getting through it. Like, this too will pass. Like, I was always trying to stay optimistic. I never thought, like, why me? Because I was going to support group meetings at Epilepsy Toronto throughout, and even when I couldn't make it there, friends would call, and we were on Facebook together, and there were always people worse off than me. And I think that's always the case. There's always going to be someone worse off.
Andy, one question I didn't get to earlier is I wondered, because you have a degenerative condition, a chronic condition, you're going to become more dependent on people. That's always hard, especially someone as a parent. You're going to be dependent on your daughter, for example. Is that hard? Does that worry you?
Yes. I have a mother who's 98 years old. She's in a nursing home. She's a victim of great confusion. Pardon me. And I have a daughter who lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who's very wise in ways I'm not. You mentioned executive function. Executive function is a phrase I never even heard before. I found that it was a major symptom of Parkinson's. Just not being able, pardon me in language, not being able to get your shit together. Just everything's forgotten, everything's dismissed, everything's postponed, nothing's ever finished. Jessie, my daughter, is absolutely the reverse of that, and I know it. She parents me, I parent my mother parents me, drives you crazy. And yes, you become dependent on advice from sources you didn't think you'd ever respect as having better judgment than your own. And you have to depend on friends. The two people who picked me up tonight, Bob and Lola down here, picked me up at the airport, brought meals for me, encouraged me to do this when my daughter was saying, go home, don't do it tonight, you need your rest, a long week. And you find yourself, it's hard to accept that kind of support. It's hard to accept that kind, your husband, I don't know what he did, quit his job to look after you. So you find yourself feeling a weird kind of guilt even though you're not culpable of this. They're not culpable of anything other than trying to help. But you wonder how you could ever repay it. It's hard.
And Whitney, did you feel that guilt? Do you feel you can repay it?
It's huge. Like, having to, in the video they showed before, I was a super independent person,
Yeah.
and having to just say, okay, fine, you can, just giving it all up, giving all that independence up and accepting the support of people. I mean, it's huge. Your support network is really needed.
Wow.
But also, it's really hard. You do feel guilty. And you also take it out in a weird way. It was a really hard, for a long time, establishing this new world order as it was in our house of being taken care of, but also the guilt is huge. It's a huge issue. And also I felt guilty for being a part-time mom and having my kids having to come into the room and me being in bed or being in my wheelchair and talking to me and coming to me when they were so small. It's a huge issue.
And how do you explain epilepsy to your kids?
Well, my son was about just a year and a half when he was holding my hand, and I would be having a seizure, and he would be saying, "It's okay, Mommy," and that was really, really hard for me, like having him hold me through a seizure. He doesn't remember it now, but of course, when he tells the stories, he was a star and he was a hero, and he tells everyone. But he is a hero now. But he's we talk about it in a sense of Purple Day is coming up. And he and my daughter go out to their schools and they hand out purple bracelets to the kids in their class, and they wear purple and they promote it and they fundraise for Purple Day too, which is great. So, and they know their mom, I mean, I'm not cured, like they know their mom has epilepsy and they talk about it, and we still talk about it every day in our home, so yeah.
And Rick, while we're on this theme, people with ADHD can be, how can I put it politely, a challenge to their friends sometimes and their family. How do you deal with that? Do you ever have guilt?
I think way more common than guilt, because we don't remember that we were rude to people necessarily. We can be entertaining. So, but some of us, yeah, if you've got conduct disorder and some of the other things going on at the same time, it gets messy. The biggest thing I think with ADHD for adults, because 85% still do not know and vaguely are recognizing themselves, but saying, at my age, what can I do about it? And the answer is tons. The biggest thing is regret. When I found out I was 47, and the first thought was, I could have been Steven Spielberg. And then I realized, no, I'm not Jewish, and he is. So, and I went through, and eventually, but it is very hard, and especially when parents refuse to have a child. I don't want him labeled. Yeah, he's already got a label, troublemaker, friendless, blah, blah, blah. And then when they take it on and start making changes and doing some of the things that can be done, and they watch, and then suddenly the kid's invited to a birthday and not sent home after 10 minutes for hitting another kid, that's when they feel guilty.
Jump in, Andy.
I think the other thing that's really a problem, I'm sure you two have felt this as well, you were told on the one hand that this disease you have is responsible for a misbehaving brain, and you misbehave as a result. And you don't know whether to blame it on the disease or whether you're hiding behind the disease. It can be something very tiny, very small, saying something inappropriate. I was just wondering, should I have used that S word a little while ago? I wouldn't have years ago. I don't think I would have. For what it's worth, it's not terrible. I think you can handle it. But the second it came out of my mouth, I'm thinking, is that a lack of impulse control? Is that Parkinson speaking? That's a trivial thing. There are big, big things as well. And when you find yourself saying, cut me some slack, you know, it's not my fault, it's my disease, and you realize how far can you carry that? How far can you take it?
Well, there's a great phrase, which is, this is an explanation, but it's not an excuse. So if you were rude to someone, you now know why, or you were short with someone, or you didn't listen. You tuned out because we were having this conversation with the kids in a noisy restaurant, and I'm drawn to I can actually hear 3 other table conversations going on at the same time, and people with ADHD think they have a hearing problem. So that understanding, oh my goodness, this is what's going on. It's not a moral issue, but that is such a relief. Yeah, so I really get that you also get stuck in that.
I experienced that in a different way with after surgery. Now I have an acquired brain injury.
Oh.
And so it becomes.
You can do anything now. No, really, you can use this as an excuse, as license. You go crazy, you know. Have some fun.
Well,
I don't even have this. I just get, it's an excuse.
I remember I was at a party in LA with, and something happened, and my sister was there, and I said something to someone, and I didn't mean to be rude, and my sister said, I'm sorry, she's got an acquired brain injury. And that was it. From then on, everyone was so nice to me. I could do anything. I could have walked out with one of their kids. Honestly, nobody would have given me anything. It was...
I want to ask, I'll start with you, Whitney. I want to ask each of you, what's the biggest myth or misconception about your condition? We were talking about this before coming on stage. I asked you, do you swallow your tongue, jokingly? But what's the kind of...
You do get that. So people who I meet who don't know anything about epilepsy, they, do you need to put a wooden spoon in someone's mouth? Do you need to hold them down?
And the answer to that is no.
Absolutely, the answer to that is no. You don't need to call an ambulance every time someone has a seizure unless, the seizure is prolonged or they come out of the seizure and they're not okay. But for the most part, use your brain. But then I'd like to think that, but then not many people know enough about epilepsy, which is sad, I think, in this day and age, that not many people know enough. I mean, it is Epilepsy Awareness Month. It's Brain Awareness Week. I'm so happy that, these kinds of things happen where people can come and learn and feel free. I mean, and this is another thing, if you know someone with epilepsy, talk to them about it and ask them questions, and don't be embarrassed to say, I don't know that much. What happens? What happens when you have a seizure? I mean, there's 40 different kinds of seizures. Wow. Everyone's epilepsy is different. So, I myself had 4 different ones. So you need to, learn, and if you know if you work with someone who has them, find out what happens to them. If you know anyone who has it, find out what happens to them.
So, Rick, you talked already about some of the misconceptions. So I'm going to change the question for you.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, what's the advantage of being diagnosed? You talked about 1 in 6 people not being diagnosed. What's the advantage?
No,
Because there's a label that
only
comes with
1 in 6 have been diagnosed, so 5 out of 6 have not. So the first thing is you have an explanation that you can do with. There's nothing you can do with lazy, stupid, or crazy. Those are character faults. Low dopamine you can do things about through exercise, through a variety of things, through the medications, which are safer than aspirin. And have been around since 1937. Just getting the education is huge. That's why we're doing what I'm not diagnosing anyone, but I am getting as much solid information as we can out there from top experts and packaging it in a way that, if you want to call it packaging it, but putting it out there in a way that you can actually sit through and not fall asleep, because doctors can be sometimes, a lot of the researchers are researchers and they're not clinicians. So I don't know if that answers that.
Yeah,
but
that's great. And Andy, what about you? What's the biggest myth or misconception about Parkinson?
I don't know about Parkinson specifically, frankly, André, but what I've learned, and it's really sobering, I think when people have a gift, if they're a great musician or a great artist, we tend to think that's something wonderful. It comes from their soul. It comes from the same brain all the other stuff does. We're going to one day learn that people who have powerful creativity, creative impulses are as responsible or not responsible, as the case may be, as someone who's got a brain lesion and goes to the top of a building and starts shooting people. We find out later it's his brain that was at fault. And that's going to be very difficult for people. I think we have a society which has been brought up on the idea of body and soul. Your soul is your brain. That's your soul. If you're a good soul or an old soul, it's because you got that kind of brain work to do. If you're a bad soul or a vicious person, it's quite possible that rather than having a terrible upbringing or something, it's the result of something that's gone wrong in your head. And that's going to be very, very hard for people. We're all moralizers. We're all want to desperately believe that someone who's talented and a gentleman is virtuous, someone who's a slob and has no talent at all is evil. And I think what I've learned, seeing behaviors on my own part, which I'm either proud of, by the way, or embarrassed by, are in fact things that are just a result of my brain. And it's quite possible they'll one day be able to open you up after you're gone and say, there it is. There's Norman Rockwell's gift. There's Picasso's gift. There's Shostakovich. There's Casals. And I don't think we want to know that. I really don't.
It's interesting. ADHD in 1902, Dr. George Still defined it as a defect of moral control. Because you're supposed to sit quietly in class, and that's how society works. We take children who are active and at that perfect age, and we tell them to sit for 15, 16 years in a classroom. So it has been seen, ADHD more than some other things, I think, has been seen as an issue of moral control. And the other thing I think that will happen in the next little while is definitely there'll be an overlap, because if you have ADHD, you're a much higher rate of Tourette's, of OCD, of depression. They all overlap each other. And I think that the labels will start to disappear.
Yeah, I think we're starting to recognize that there's brain diseases and not moral failings that happen to people.
And when someone's I've got a grouchy uncle, I've got a mom who worries too much, I've got an aunt who gossips, it's wiring. It's just wiring. And the good news is our brains are on some level plastic, and there's also this amazing kinds of surgery that we're going in there. I remember when the first heart transplant happened, and that was like, how can they do that? They're not going to have a brain transplant, but they will be able to get in. They already are able to get in and do things. And some things you may not want to change everything.
Yeah, there's not brain transplants, but we've got some pretty amazing brain surgery going on.
Yeah, I'd say
even
brain
here in Toronto.
transformation.
I'm
is
able to
what's
figure out, is
possible.
a brain transplant a body transplant or a brain transplant?
Yeah,
Think about this.
Who's the donor?
So let's go to the audience, and we have bright lights here, but if you guys wave, whoever has the mics, we'll start with some couple of questions with the audience. And please ask questions, and there's not make soliloquies, and there's only one rule. Don't say this is for all the panelists. Pick one out, and that way we'll get more questions in. So who's got the mic? Okay. Going all the way to the back, I think.
This question is for Whitney. I noticed that in your video you talked about a 2-year recuperation after the surgery. Could you tell us a little bit about the recuperation, please?
It's a long period to cover, but I'll try my best. When I first went in for the initial consult, I was told a 6 to 8 week recovery period is normal. But yeah, mine was 2 years. It wasn't physiotherapy, because I didn't need any. It was more, how do I put this? I needed, because the brain needed to be rewired from that piece that had been taken out. And that was, obviously took some time. I suffered from a depression period, which was very hard. I felt like I wasn't necessarily myself. I don't know what area of the room I'm looking at to address this question. So if I could just be told.
It came from all the way at the back.
Okay, hi, thank you. Sorry, the lights are quite bright. So I suffered from a severe depression. I mean, not like I wasn't institutionalized or anything, but it was a depression. I worked with, the hospital teams you with their in-house neuropsychiatrist, who deals with the acquired brain injury. She's in the acquired brain injury department, and they're a neuropsychologist. So you're working with the team, which is great. And so you're not left alone to flounder. It's not like you have the brain surgery and then it's like, okay, see you later. So I saw her every week and we worked together, which was fantastic. But also, I have underlying health issues that landed me in the ICU between the 2 surgeries that I had, between the initial subdural EEG and the removal of the EEG and the actual resection. And that was quite debilitating, and that took a long time to recover from as well. It landed me actually back in the hospital the following month. So there was health reasons that took me to recover, as well as the trauma to the brain. So the trauma to the brain was a longer recovery than I expected.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
This question is for Andy. Down here, second
Thank
row.
you. Good. Thanks.
Depression. Did you experience depression in a greater degree with Parkinson's than anything you might have had before? And if the answer to that is yes, what sort of coping strategy did you develop to deal with the possibility of recurring depression?
I had a clinical depression years ago, 35 years ago, as a matter of fact, and that was so awful, that was so hideous, that was such agony, psychic agony. I have a great deal of respect for the word depression.
No, this is,
Yeah.
I'm not just like bantering
Exactly.
about. This is
I've never had another clinical depression since then, and I've been depressed and I've been sad and I've been reactively depressed, which is a clinical term that just says you're reacting normally and healthily to a very disturbing incident. In my case, it was very interesting because interesting is a word to use. In 5 years, my brother died, got killed in a car accident. My mother became a victim of dementia. My wife died of lung cancer. My career ended earlier than I thought, and I moved all alone to a farmhouse in southern Ontario and lived there alone for a year. So I had some dark nights of the soul and some dark days of the soul. And frankly, I'd watch television, I'd read an interesting book, I'd try to distract myself. But that's an issue I think that applies to anybody who's very sad. There's something called the Beck Depression Inventory. I won't trouble you too long with this. This is a fellow I interviewed once who gave me, this guy who wrote a book called Feeling Good. Very, very terrific book about depression. I took the Beck Depression Inventory when I was preparing for the interview, and I got a very low score. I thought to myself then, out of 80 points or something, how could anybody be alive who had over 50 points? When I had the clinical depression, I got like 63. That's an objective measure of how depressed you are, and I suggest to anybody who ever thinks they're depressed, or do I need a doctor, go out and get that Feeling Good book, take the Beck Depression Inventory, and if you score over a certain point, ask your GP if you've got one to refer you to someone important. That's a different matter, and it doesn't have anything to do particularly with Parkinson's, but not everybody suffers from depression as Parkinson's.
And Rick, I wondered if you'd weigh in. We think of people with ADHD, happy, upbeat comedians. There's that dark side as well, right?
There is. Until you have the explanation, it's a very dark side. And when you start dealing with things, it's one step forward, half step back, 3 steps forward, and so on. The other thing, a big issue is that the poor memory means people with ADHD say, oh, nothing's changed. And you have to ask the people around them, what are you talking about? You're doing, this is the same with anxiety, with a lot of things. People, you don't know. I mean, none of us know anyway. We're not good at self-assessment. Some people are a little better than others. It's one of those different intelligences that Daniel Coleman writes about. But we're not good, and you need to hear other people. The biggest challenge, I think, with ADHD is we're so focused on the next thing, the next short term, because the long term is not there. And so people with ADHD, they turn 40, they turn 50, they don't have kids or the house they wanted, and they don't know why, because they never were able to imagine, what will I be like at 40? What do I want to have now? What do I have to do to plan for that? So in our house, I generate the stuff, the ideas, the scripts, the shows, but my wife takes care of, and I help as much as I can until she says it's okay, and then pushes me away. But she is the one who can keep, in some ways, the long-term vision of what the house is going to look like that we eventually want. And I'm keen to contribute, but that's a big issue for people with ADHD, is we're just so in the moment. And it's not in the moment of really present with the other person. It's just, it's like that, you know, as you can imagine, that 9 radio stations going, and you're so busy listening to them all, or trying to sort through to hear the one you want.
So let's go. Do we have a question on this side? Oh, sorry. Okay. Do you have a mic? Yeah. Great. Okay, fire away.
This question is for Rick. I just want to know, is there a number of medications for ADHD? I guess my real question is, what are you taking? Because I have it and I want to get rid of it. What Whitney talked about with the number of medications that she has for the different types.
So there are 2 different kinds. There's stimulant medication, which is, you know, that's why so many people with ADHD, it's the only place I've been to at a conference where you still see people smoking caffeine, and then, of course, stimulant medication. So the one that everyone knows is Ritalin. It's been around since 1937. It was given to some kids who had brain injury from an encephalitis outbreak. And the doctor who gave it to them said, Dr. Bradley said that it was disheartening because one pill did more for these kids than a year working one-on-one with a teacher. The kids called them, the half who had a positive result, called it their arithmetic pills because they could stay focused. So there are the stimulants. There's also longer-term ones that are more like an SSRI. They prevent your body from sucking the dopamine back up again. They let it stay there a little longer. And I think that one's the Strattera. It's either Adderall or Strattera. I don't know. The one I take is called Concerta. It's a long-lasting form of methylphenidate, which is Ritalin, and so on. And it's interesting. I used to hate the name methylphenidate, and then I found out, I can't remember it now, but what the chemical name for caffeine is, and it's fluoronoxofluoride. If you tell people, yeah, I use fluoronoxotoxylate, whatever it was, it's oh my God, what is it? Well, it's at Starbucks, actually, and I got a dealer over at Horton's that supplies me with it. But like I said, the medication levels the playing field. That's all it does. It's like insulin. It doesn't cure anything. You then have to go out on the playing field and play. But suddenly you have, I could sit there and do a year's worth of GST, which was, as I say, stunning. But the medication, I would say go to our website and then talk with people, because all of the medications that are out there, there are people on them and they're all sharing their experiences. And when people stick with it and try different things, 80% of them end up finding a positive result, which means they prefer being on it than off it.
Great. Oh, someone upstairs, actually. Okay, I wasn't looking upstairs. Sorry. Go ahead.
So this is for Rick.
Uh-oh.
And to the lady that cut me off, thank you. So during your presentation, you listed a whole bunch of symptoms, symptoms. But I think these symptoms can really be everyone and anyone. And I wasn't clear because the discussion, you're talking about stats, like statistical numbers. So just because someone may seem impatient or they won't wait their turn or any one of the things you presented, that doesn't mean they have ADHD or ADD.
No, it doesn't. And it's a great point because everybody experiences that. And it doesn't rule their life, and they don't consider it a problem. The people who have ADHD and get diagnosed are in a doctor's office. They're not being grabbed on the street by pharmaceutical companies. They're in their doctor's office going, I'm on my third divorce, and I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong, and my kids hate me, or whatever it is. The one doctor told us he had a guy who forgot that he'd stored $1 million in his attic. So when he lost $20 or $30 million business, a year later, after living in poverty, found $1 million he'd stored up there to hide from the tax people. Oh, okay, and started a new business. So what makes it a disorder is you get to say. The person who says it's disorder is you and the doctor going, yeah, this is a problem. And so that's when it is, that's why it's very easy to dismiss. Well, everybody has this. Absolutely. Not everybody has the symptoms of Parkinson or a seizure from epilepsy. This is a really tricky thing to disorder or to diagnose because it is so common. But what's that? You're not a doctor, no. So you got to get you need a second opinion. What I want to get through to people is, if you have this, so what? The people who say I don't want to be labeled are the people who think labels are bad, right? They're well, I don't want my child labeled. What's his name? Dennis. Well, he's got a label. He's got a label. The label is Canadian boy. Grade 3, athlete, Dennis. What's his middle name? We've got labels. If that label gives you power, if dealing with this gives you some access to, this is why I do this, or now I'm going to do this, or guess what? When we go to dinner, we're not going to that noisy restaurant. We don't. When we go into the restaurant now, my wife instantly goes, you face here, because she knows if there's a window behind her, I'll be drawn. Because it's 7 at night, I'll be drawn to every car that goes by and miss half of what she's saying, even though I love her. And I'm interested in what she has to say. So that's when it's a disorder. And that's the trick, is to figure out, is it impairing you? And then the downside is, as adults, we say, well, it doesn't impair me anymore. Why not? Because I don't do that. I don't go to parties. I never had kids because I knew I wouldn't be trustworthy. I've heard that one from people who got diagnosed at 40 and are like, I wanted to have children, but I didn't think I was reliable, and now I know why, and I could have been. And so bad decisions get made until you know what's going on.
So we're running out of time. I'm going to try and squeeze in one last question.
One more up top.
Yep, right down here. So we have one right in front here. I think we'll go here.
All right. Hi, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. I have an ADHD question for Andy, actually. All the many years you dealt with entertainers, how many of them would you say were obviously in the club of ADHD guys? And is that a prerequisite to being an entertainer, perhaps?
I don't know. Going back to depression, there's a figure that says that people who are poets and so forth and writers and creative types are very much more likely to be depressed. And having been told that, you feel, my goodness, if I cure my depression, I'm going to cure my creativity. I don't believe that. I think Robin Williams is a good example of someone who, he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's days before I think he took his own life. And he probably had, someone asked me what I thought of that, and I said, well, this is a man who depended on physical comedy. That was his thing. And he probably took a look at people like Michael J. Fox or whoever and said, if I am forced to narrow my talent down to that range of expression, maybe I won't be valuable anymore. Maybe no one will hire me. I'm terribly sad that he did what he did, but I sort of understand why. I think people who, this goes back to what I said before. I don't want to make too much of this. It comes from a book called Molecules of the Mind, which I invite you to look up sometime. Brilliant book, 30 years old, but anticipated all the discoveries we're getting now. It goes back to the fact that we don't understand, and we don't appreciate enough, the fact that we own all of our behaviors. And our brain is responsible for them. So you can't flatter a person again out of sight who's very talented and disregard and ignore someone who isn't, or is not making you laugh, or is trying too hard, or whatever. All of these things begin and end in the brain, and at some point or another we're going to quantify them. It's going to make us feel less human, it really is. But it's going to make us feel a little more reassured in the same way that when Rick had a name to attach to all this strange behavior, he felt better about himself, not worse. But this is going to come to all of us, so get ready.
Great. So sadly, we're out of time. We're going to have a few closing words. So come on up. And while we're waiting for that, I just want to say it was a great honor to be able to be allowed to participate with such great panelists. So thank you to Rick and Whitney and Andy.
I am sure that you were both as touched and as informed as I was by this evening. And I really want to thank our moderator, André Picard, for handling that phenomenally, including handling somebody who is the interviewer. And
Interviewing isn't brain surgery, you know?
And I do think that we have been truly honored by the presentation, the openness, the courage, the honesty, and literally the open-heartedness of our three wonderful speakers. So thank you.